We get many different calls, and some are from grandparents who are wondering if they are able to seek custody of a grandchild. And sometimes we get calls from a parent who wants to know if they can exclude their parents from seeing their children and if their parents have any recourse. So in Pennsylvania, there is a statute that determines who may file for custody. So in order to get into custody court, you have to have what's called standing, and standing is not everybody gets to file. You have to meet one of the conditions. So for grandparents, you can fall under two categories in order to file for primary physical or partial physical. Um, so for primary physical, if you have been caring for the child, even if you're not a grandparent, you are called in loco parentis of the child, and that gives you standing to then file for custody. So if the parent gave you the child and you have been caring, you will have the right to file in Pennsylvania. But the specific grandparents who may file, they can file under that. But if they're not in loco parentis, meaning the child isn't living with you, then if the relationship began with the child by consent of the parent or under a court order. So if the parents never let you see the child, from the get-go, you're not going to be able to file for primary custody because it does require consent now. And if you're able and willing to assume responsibility, then when one of the following conditions are met. The first is if the child has been determined to be a dependent child. So a child could be dependent for many reasons related to juvenile matters. In that case, you would have standing as a grandparent to file for primary. If the child is substantially at risk due to parental abuse, neglect, drug or alcohol abuse, or incapacity, this is where we see a lot of grandparents raising children because of a drug addicted child of their own who is unable to care for the child. Or if there's alcohol abuse and they can't care for the child, a grandparent could step in. Or the other would be is that if the child has, for a period of at least 12 consecutive months, resided with you, with the grandparent, excluding a very brief temporary absence from the home, and the child's then removed by your son or daughter, and your child could be living with you and then they move out. So if they're with you for 12 months and then they move out, you must file within 6 months of them leaving in order to have standing for primary custody. So when you're living with your parents, and for 12 months with your child, they will get standing to file for primary. And instances where they may do that would be if they consider that you were living with them because you needed their help because you're unable to parent and they have concerns for the child. Because in any custody action, the court's going to give preference to the parent unless there's a reason not to, because it's always the best interest of the child. Um, and then for partial custody, which means you have less than 50% or less than 50 or 100% of the time or 80%, you have, or even for supervised custody where the child is deceased. So if your child dies and the other parent's not letting you see the child, you can still file for custody of your grandchild in that case. You're not going to get primary custody unless that parent might be addicted to drugs, but you can get time with the child. It's very important to the courts that the child see both sides of the family, especially when your child has passed on, or where the relationship began with the consent of the parent and where somebody has filed a custody proceeding. So if your son or daughter is getting divorced or they weren't married and they filed a custody proceeding, you then have standing for partial custody. And as long as you've had contact with the children, and if the parties don't agree on whether or not grandparents or great grandparents should have custody, and when the child has been for 12 months, again, excluding brief periods, you can also file as long as it's done within the 6 months. So you can get either partial or primary in those instances. So not all grandparents have rights. If the parents of the child are married and they do not want you to see your grandchild, you're going to have a tough time getting standing, meaning the right to bring a custody action in Pennsylvania.